facing development challenges on a global scale.
Today, 40 out of 56 million deaths
are attributable
to non-communicable diseases
such as heart disease, stroke, chronic respiratory disease, and diabetes.
Over 800,000 people
die by suicide every year.
In the Philippines, 5 out of 10 families in 2017
were deprived of basic education.
Nang dahil sa kahirapan, maraming pamilya ang napipilitang pahintuin
sa pag-aaral ang kanilang mga anak.
In remote areas, public transportation is inaccessible.
Children have to cross rivers and climb hills
with their books and bags just to go to school.
Philippines ranked third in the top 10 countries with the most natural disasters
for the years 2005 to 2014.
Driven by the goal to achieve sustainable future for all by 2030, the UN identified and adopted 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, to address the global challenges we face. This can only be achieved through a collaborative effort of all countries and stakeholders.
Aligned with the ATRAM's mission to engage, inspire, and collaborate
to build a financially secure future,
we are committed to building that future where no one is left behind.
We have adopted 3 out of the 17 SDGs,
aiming to make a positive impact,
as well as ingraining more responsible
and sustainable business practices within ATRAM.
Good health and well-being ensures healthy lifestyle and promotes well-being for all ages. Quality education ensures inclusive and equitable quality education and promotes lifelong learning opportunities for all. Climate action takes urgent action to combat climate change and its adverse impacts. With these goals, a sustainable future is possible, a future where no one is left behind.
The time is now, more than ever, that we must work together
to achieve the global goals in ensuring healthy lives, improving access to education,
and fighting climate crisis.
We at ATRAM declare full support to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Let's start today. Let's invest in a sustainable future together.
Invest to thrive. Invest together.
Good morning. Welcome to ESG and Sustainable Investing, the Rise of Purpose. This is part of ATRAM's exclusive and ongoing webinar interview series with some top business minds in the country. Today, we are honored to have as our guest, Mr. Jaime Augusto Zobel de Ayala, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Ayala Corporation. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that you may ask questions throughout the discussion by clicking on the Q&A button on your screen. We will get to as many questions as we can at the latter part of the discussion. Additionally, I'd like to let you know that this webinar is being recorded. Copies will be disseminated within the day, as well as posted on our social media pages. Today's moderator is tasked with overseeing the management of ATRAM's domestic stock market portfolios, spearheading the development of our equity investment process, and periodically sharing the firm's outlook on equities. Let me now hand the floor over to ATRAM's Head of Equities, Mr. Julian Tarrobago Jr.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to episode 6 of the ATRAM special webcasts, where we give you a glimpse of the conversations we have with business leaders, which is an integral part of our due diligence process, which we do before we decide to invest or not to invest in companies or sectors. Today is a special webcast. I'm smiling, I'm excited, as we feature not just the captain of industry, but one of the captains of the economy and the from the private sector. And we will be talking about a very important theme that is sweeping the world. That theme is ESG and sustainability. Now, for those who don't know, ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance practices, the three main pillars of sustainable investments. E considers how companies act as stewards of nature, including issues like climate change, waste and pollution, and resource depletion. S stands for social, which basically examines how companies manage relationships with stakeholders, which include employees, customers, suppliers, and the communities from within they operate. These issues include labor, health and safety, while G stands for governance or corporate governance, which basically deals with a company's leadership, internal controls, protection of shareholder rights, and some other issues include anti-corruption measures, tax transparency, and the whole list of other factors. At ATRAM, we have integrated ESG in our investment process as early as a couple of years ago as part of our risk assessment. And we look forward, actually, now the next step is to coming up with ESG and SDG, or Sustainable Development Goal focused strategies to basically help not just give you the ability to help make a contribute and make a difference, but rather to participate in this massive growing trend. Why is it massive? Why is it growing? How much is it growing? Give you an idea, ESG investing has exploded globally. Recently exceeding, if I remember correctly, $1 trillion in assets under management globally. While impact investments, I believe, are much more. Yeah, this is driven by investors' desire to make a positive impact, and by growing evidence that strong ESG ratings actually translate to strong financial performance for the companies and ability to create long-term shareholder value. So it's significant, and it's becoming more significant. That said, we are extremely grateful and honored to feature today a visionary leader, a nation builder, philanthropist, and one of the United Nations 10 Sustainable Development Goal pioneers, Jaime Augusto Zobel de Ayala, known widely simply as JAZA, who is the JAZA is the chairman and CEO of Ayala Corporation. Now, since taking over as president and CEO of Ayala Corp in 1994, JAZA has steered Ayala Corp to becoming one of the most relevant, transformational, and enduring business groups in Asia today. He was the first Filipino recognized with, that just happens to be the first Filipino recognized with Harvard Business School's highest honor, the Alumni Achievement Award, where he was cited for his innovative entrepreneurial style of management. JAZA also has a closet full of CEO of the Year awards, which include Emerging Market CEO of the Year in the late 90s. Sorry, I'm giving you. Now we won't get into all of these numerous achievements or awards because we'll need a whole day or the whole afternoon just for this. So I think for today's discussion, it's relevant to note that JAZA was named, as mentioned earlier, the United Nations Global Compact as one of the 10 Sustainable Development Goals pioneers for 2017. He was the first Filipino and Southeast Asian to be recognized for this honor, given by the UN to individuals recognized who were showcasing how business can be, quote unquote, a force for good, and for their efforts and achievements in advancing the SDGs. So I'm 1 minute over my introduction time, so I'd like to welcome to the webcast, without further ado, Jaime Augusto Zobel de Ayala, JAZA. Welcome to the webcast, JAZA.
Thank you very much, Julian. Thank you very much for this invitation, and just so happy to be here.
Great having you on the webcast. I hope your family, you and your family are well. Before we get into all of these important topics, people are curious. I've had a few people ask me already, what's a typical day like for JAZA, and how are you spending your time, your free time nowadays?
Thanks very much, Julian. Actually, I guess all of us have had to adjust in a new way to the situation. It started a certain way and has evolved. These days, well, I don't know if it's age or whatever, Julian, but I get up a little bit earlier than normal, maybe around 5 o'clock. My eyes are awake. I start reading a little bit in bed, and usually at about 6 a.m. I have an exercise routine that I go through. I have a gym here at home. And when that's finished, I go back to reading quite a bit, maybe for the next hour, hour and a half. All kinds of stuff, emails, catching up on news and whatever else. And then, starting back to work around 8:30 or 9 o'clock. These days, I've been focused on my health a little bit more, so I don't really have breakfast, just a coffee. And then actually what I celebrate is lunch. We're all here at home, so lunch is a special occasion for the whole family. We get together, we enjoy it. Usually it's a special lunch, and then get back to work. And usually the day ends at about 6, 7, depending on the situation, although there are a lot of international webcasts now. But I skip dinner and just start relaxing about 7 o'clock onwards. So I don't think life is that different for everybody else. But at the same time, the lack of need to travel at this point in time really just saves up so much time. So one can structure one's life a little bit in an organized way.
Great. Sounds like a fun and eventful and you mentioned reading. I like reading too. I mean, there's that Harry Truman quote: "Not all readers are leaders, but all leaders are readers." So that kind of fits the bill. I'm curious, what are you reading right now, and what's the last great thing that you've learned?
Well, these days, Julian, there's so much to read, right? All of us have to absorb information like we haven't had to before. There's also, of course, TV, Netflix, and all the rest, which are a lot of fun. Everything's so much more intelligent now on the TV, so it's a bit of a struggle. But usually in the early mornings, I usually at that 5 o'clock time frame, I have a chance to catch up on reading, and I have a bit of an eclectic style. I don't really read business books, actually, very rare that I read business books, unless there are people someone like you, like David Rubenstein and his interviews. But I guess the last thing I've read in my reading style sort of takes me from one eclectic topic to another. I've been enjoying a fellow called Simon Winchester. He's a British journalist. He has written a number of books. I've read about 3 or 4 of them, but the very last one I guess I've been reading is one called The Men Who United the States, which is all the explorers who basically charted a path across the United States, including the people who found the route from the east to the west, and how the connections, be it roads, be it travel, be it explorers, be it builders, connected. And that then led me to take a look at the role of American Indians, because they were, I guess, the inhabitants for a long, long time in that region, and how this influx of people began to impact them. And so I started reading books about American Indians, how long their culture had existed in the US, how come they didn't unite against the people coming in, and as an indigenous community, how did they handle their lives? And so many interesting things and lessons about the way we live today, the way the Indian communities led their lives, the way they integrated their culture to nature, how agriculture developed, how they integrated that in a safe and constructive way into generating, I guess, their own sustainability principles at the time, and how that was destroyed actually by a health epidemic. It's ironic. Yeah. We're caught by health issues now, and really the biggest disaster that befell the American Indians really was the influenza and the lack of immunity to many of the I guess the health-related issues that the people coming into the United States brought with them. But anyway, I'm going on too long. I like it.
Because, keep going.
Yeah, it's. I think one learns a lot from many different topics. I try to keep my mind a little bit broad, so that you just pick up raw ideas from different areas, learn about people, learn how people help with problems.
So thank you for that. There's so much to unpack from what you just said. I find myself in just watching and hearing you. But one I guess, again, so much to unpack from that. But one key takeaway is that it's all about our ancestors, and I think it's apt to talk about that now on the topic of sustainability and ESG, because at the end of the day, we're trying to be good ancestors. They say what we do now impacts what our decisions now impact events 7 generations forward. So I thought that was pretty much very, very interesting. So you brought up also David Rubenstein. So I think that will be a good segue to talk about leadership now, because David Rubenstein, one of the great interviewers of today, and also the founder of the Carlyle Group, I believe, said all leaders are different, and all leaders are also similar in many ways. He went on to identify common leadership traits, which were having leaders, great leaders had failed on something big in the past. I think he was referring to Jeff Bezos. Persistency, a strong sense of purpose, wherein he was referring to Warren Buffett, I believe, and ability to communicate. His example was Oprah Winfrey. I'm very interested to hear. How about you? I mean, what do you think are the most important traits of a strong leader, and yeah, how do you try and embody that? I guess that's the question.
Well, leadership, Julian, is such a tricky topic, right? I have some specific. I'm not a great believer in talking about leadership only because there are just so many styles. There's no one style, and I think the first thing people misinterpret is that there is actually no specific style of leadership. You can have different people providing leadership at key moments in different ways, and sometimes there's some great people who are the wrong people at the wrong time. I mean, you take someone like Winston Churchill. He was a great wartime leader. Nobody galvanized the United Kingdom like he did. But as a peacetime leader, he had significant failures throughout, many different areas. So specifically, that the first thing to understand is there's no real roadmap for leadership. But from my point of view, I guess I look at people that I admire, people who've made a difference. Maybe the one thing that always sticks in my mind is you have to have a point of view as a leader. In other words, whether you're political or business or a nonprofit, you have to have a sense of what the future will look like and a point of view. And that point of view can be in economic terms, a more communist oriented, a more capitalist oriented, a strong government, a weak government. You have to have a sense of how things should be run. So a point of view is important. The second thing I've always believed, you have to be able, and I've used this expression a lot internally in the company, you have to be able to connect the dots. There are many cases where I think business success really comes from being able to take a whole range of different topics and events and facts and bring them together, a little bit like an abstract painting or, an unfinished work of art. You have to have a sense of the whole. And as a leader, you try to connect those dots and make that whole happen. So that's important. You have to be able to visualize a future that's different to the one that exists or one that you'd like to go to. And so that, I think, in leadership is vitally important. I think you have to be authentic. People can tell when somebody's not being authentic. I think you have to be bold, Julian. You have to have a sense of the possible and be able to take a risk and step out of comfort zone for something that's a little bit intangible. You have to be comfortable, I think, connecting with people, listening to them, understanding them. I think empathy is an underrated skill, Julian. Leadership sometimes in the past, you have to be strong and show strength. But I think showing empathy in this day and age is important, understanding people, listening to them, having a sense of what's important to them. And I think women leaders tend to have that a little bit more than men, I feel. And somehow you see the Prime Minister of New Zealand, for example, who's just done such a good job in this crisis. But she strikes me as the kind of person who's a good listener, who has empathy. Well, the list goes on, Julian. I hope that gives you some ideas of the things that I consider important.
Absolutely, and amen to that. What resonates most with me is the need to be bold and the need to listen and empathize. From what you mentioned, there's an interesting dynamic. I understand that you, like all leaders, share certain leadership responsibilities with a host of other people, and with you in particular, you're known to have a very close relationship with your brother Fernando, and I'm wondering how that's evolved and how does that flow into the leadership of the Ayala Group.
Well,
that strong relationship?
Well, it's an unusual situation, right? Because Fernando and I are only a year apart. And so we grew up together, right? I think probably maybe the first initial bond is we followed the same schooling system throughout. Both of us basically went to boarding school in the UK at a very young age. We were both 9 years old. I was a year ahead, but he followed a year later. But, you know, both of us went through similar experiences, Julian. We went to the UK young. We had to kind of sort our lives out as young students there in a very unusual environment. Then we went to high school together. We went to college together. And so we've had many similar opportunities. And then we both joined Ayala 1 year apart, but also straight out of college and started a professional path through there. So there's been a lot that we've seen together, and that's provided a lot of unity and that sense of trust, I guess, when my father decided to let go the CEO post in Ayala, he basically left it open-ended for Fernando and I to decide how to provide leadership for the future. And actually, it was a very quick decision on our part to provide a framework between the two of us for joint leadership, Fernando taking responsibility for parts of the company and myself taking responsibility for others. And once we agreed to that, we each played a leadership position in those industries and then coordinated at the very top at the holding company. It was a relationship that was clear from the beginning and has developed well over time. And it's always been actually a pleasure to have someone that you can rely on and talk to. Leadership also can be a bit tough. Not many people you can share ideas with, and with Fernando, it's been the opposite. It's been a chance to communicate, to share, and take responsibility together, and that's been actually very comforting.
Wow, that must be a very fulfilling experience as well, and happy experience. So on leadership again, moving it over now to the Ayala Group. Ayala Corp clearly is one of the companies that are leading in terms of recognizing the need to, how do we say it, to prioritize sustainability in their operations, even amidst 2020's unprecedented economic fallout. But before we get into that in greater detail, before we get into sustainability, we dive deep into sustainability and ESG. Maybe it's best we do a check-in first on the state of the Philippine economy. So just to get an idea of what the backdrop is for all of this these discussions on sustainability. So what is your read, Jaime, on the Philippine economy today, and what do you think will happen over the next 12 months?
Well, it's obviously a difficult period. I don't have to reiterate that point, Julian. If you just go back in time, it's best to put it, I guess, from a broader overarching perspective. You know, the Philippines has had an extraordinary track record. I was doing a little bit of research the other day, and it's not since 1991. We've had continuous growth, even in some of the financial crises the country has had or faced, either in Asia or globally. 97, 2008, our country never went into a recession. It's been an extraordinary run, and I think has led to tremendous growth in our country, a growing middle class, and a different engagement we have in the world. Sometimes when I go back to my start in the company back in 1981 and reflect on what has happened since then, it's quite extraordinary that if you look at our credit standing now as a country, we're there among European nations between Spain and Italy, and when I started in 81, that was hardly the case. So we move on today, just a great legacy of an economy that's been growing, doing well, and taking our per capita income up. And perhaps the one component that I've always been a little bit concerned about is we've been a consumption-led economy rather than a balanced investment-led and consumption-led. And of course, consumption has dried up, right? So as we hit the pandemic, global consumption has come down, and that has hit us in the Philippines like anybody else. So I think the hit is quite a large one. The latest estimates from global institutions is that for the year, we will probably have a decline in our growth of between 7, 8, 9%. Some other individuals even say 10% negative growth. And that's a big big hit to the economy. So we're in that environment, and since we're consumption-led, I guess as a driver of our economy, then I think that's why we're getting hit a little bit more than many of the other economies. However, there are a number of significant pluses. I think our inflation rate generally has been quite low. I think our Banco Central has done a great job to keep liquidity flowing at a time like this. Interest rates are relatively low. And so to a certain extent at this stage, you haven't had any major shock to the system. You've had a slowdown, you have unemployment rising, and to a certain extent, you have a major slowdown in the economy, the supply side and the demand side. I think the supply side is beginning to open up, Julian. Factories are beginning to open up again. People are going back to work. Travel is allowed. I'm a little concerned about the demand side, being a consumption-driven economy. And demand-side economics means people's psychology has to be comfortable with investing again, putting funds out, buying goods and services. So the supply side is beginning to open up. And I think one area where perhaps we have to continue working jointly, the private sector and the government together, is to pump prime that demand side. It's like an engine that's sputtering, and you have to prime it a little bit and put a little gasoline in there and keep restarting it. So the supply side is there, but the demand side I'm a little worried about. It's a little too early to tell. Some of the signals are good, by the way. We've seen some rise. We have an analytics group in Ayala, and we try to dig down a little bit deep in touch points in different areas of the economy, try to measure consumption at the ground level. And there are signs of it growing. And while I'm always an optimist, I hope that those positive signs are not just a brief uptick, as people begin to spend because they've been frustrated that they haven't been, and then it slows down again. So I'm a great believer that together, private sector and government, we have to work hard to get that demand side going again. And that takes not only, I guess, technical related issues, but psychological related issues. People have to start feeling good about the future. And when people start to feel good about the future, then they also start to spend again. So in summary, it's a big hit. We're a consumption-driven economy. There's no doubt that, and plus, that unemployment, we have many overseas workers that sent the remittances back. That's going to really hit us in a big way this year. But I think we can ride it out. And if we can start a cycle of getting that demand to pick up again, then I have no doubt we will come out of this all right. But it might take a little time.
Thank you. You actually answered my next question, which was, what are the metrics you pay close, economic metrics or data you pay close attention to? So I'll ask you something else. When do you anticipate the full recovery? We're coming into November, which is a data-heavy period. This is my last question on the economy. We'll get into ESG right after this. When do you, so in November, you'll see third quarter GDP, you'll see unemployment. So that for me is a bit of an enigma, and I'm very interested to see how that number turns out. How do you what's your mindset going into November? Because it seems to be a data-heavy period from which could maybe dictate a longer recovery or a shorter one. I'm curious.
Well, you have to use, there are obviously macro statistics out there. And as I pointed out to you, Julian, I'm also, across the Ayala group, we try to get a good pulse for the micro side as well and get touch points to our analytics group. You have to look at certain realities. The economy has shut down, and it's shut down globally. And so you're also getting an influx of people who are traditionally overseas service providers of one kind or another, fellow Filipinos who've been working abroad. The number they say is up to 600,000 that are returning back to the Philippines in one way or another. And those were traditionally individuals who sent remittances back and provided foreign exchange to the country. We're lucky that the BPO sector, I think, to a certain extent, is still relatively strong. Manufacturing has been impacted globally, but that BPO sector, which is, I guess, an indirect export of the country, it's a dollar-earning, service-oriented industry, seems to be still relatively intact. I think when you have a consumption-driven economy like ours, that's less dependent on foreign investment as a driver of growth, consumption is going to take a little while to pick up again. I think it's picking up again. There are significant signs that it's showing strength, but I think if we're looking at a genuine recovery, probably you're not looking at anything until the end of next year, Julian. I mean, that one has to be realistic that a situation like this doesn't turn around overnight because it's a global issue. It's not a local issue only. If it were just a local issue, you could turn things around relatively quickly. But we're impacted by so many variables that are taking place globally that one, I think, should remain cautious. And on the health side, I think it's unrealistic for us. I don't mean to sound overly pessimistic. I just try to be as realistic as possible that a vaccine probably won't come our way till the end of next year. Certainly, we will not be a priority country. And if we are a priority country and have the good fortune to be of a vaccine that works, chances are it won't come in the kind of quantities that 110 million people will need. So I think all of us have to learn to work in an environment that is not going to be completely safe for a long time. That will hamper an ability to get the economy growing the way it should. It'll hamper tourism, the entry of people, the movement of people throughout the country, the production of goods and services. Psychologically, it'll have effect on demand. So one must extrapolate that it's going to be a tough time for a period yet. Now, that there is light at the end of the tunnel, there always is. It's just a matter of when. So I think next year will still be a difficult year. You may have upswings in some good news, some consumption patterns that begin to shift. But I think it's only realistic that we prepare for a slightly drawn out period of recovery. No economic engine gets restarted overnight. And as I said, it needs a massive amount of impetus on our part, psychological and technical, to get people's mindsets back to a positive mindset where we have a future that begins to normalize again. And that just takes a little bit of time. So I think one should remain conservative, and we hope on the health side that a vaccine starts to develop globally and that we can put it to use in the Philippines, hopefully by the end of next year and onwards.
Thank you, Jaime. So as we segue into sustainability, really appreciate your views on the economy, the check-in. Amidst all of these uncertainties we talked about on the economy, could you give us a glimpse of the role and the mindset of the Ayala Group against all of these challenges and uncertainties? And maybe as a side note, over the past 180 years, inclusion and nation building have been key components of your overall paradigm. Will these continue to serve as reliable pillars for the business moving forward as we segue into the next topic, or the main topic, which is ESG and sustainability? Thank you.
Well, I think, Julian, it's a big topic, and one can go on for quite a while on it. It all depends on how you view the role of an institution or a company. Different people have different views. I recently was invited by the Chicago Booth School to attend a conference. They were celebrating, I guess I didn't count the numbers, maybe 50 years since Thomas Friedman back in the 70s basically came up with the philosophy that the role of business is just to make a good return for their shareholders. And as part of that celebration, they invited different speakers to participate, and I was lucky to join as one of the first speakers. They were going around the world as part of their different discussions, and I ended up with a friend from the ADB, Ahmed, and talking about that role. And I took a very different approach to the one that Friedman had taken in the 70s. So that was the argument I put forward, that all of us as institutions have a broader responsibility these days to a broader group of stakeholders. Now, not everybody thinks like me, Julian, and so the moment you have a philosophy like that, your engagement with an economy changes. And I'm a great believer that a corporation has a broad set of responsibilities, and that it obviously giving stockholders a fair return on the risk capital they put to work is obviously of great importance, but our role as institutions is broader than that. So when the crisis hit, we had to quickly self-reflect, but we went to our core values in the Ayala Group, and we really divided up into 3 different segments pretty much immediately. And the first was, at a time like this, we felt that if we were to count on our employee force, our executive force to deliver for the company and probably what's going to be the most difficult period in our lives, they had to feel safe themselves. They had to feel safe financially. They had to feel safe health-wise. They had to feel safe for their families. And that was a core area that we really had to put emphasis on, number one. So we basically, Fernando and I sent a note out and said that our priority was to make sure that during this period of difficulty that our employees would as much as we could, stay safe. We'd protect them as much as we could financially and health-wise, and overweighted that. Once we felt that that was taken care of and we had an organization that could respond to us, we then stretched out to the next layer, which are all the individuals that make up the ecosystem that makes Ayala strong. These days, the capitalist system, Julian, has led to a massive integration of business units. We no longer can succeed as just an independent entity. Just the Ayala Group alone, we have about 250,000 small and medium scale industries that surround us, plus we have a number of partners globally. Fernando and I said to ourselves, look, if Ayala is to succeed and continue in the future after this terrible pandemic and the kind of pressures it's putting on the economy, that ecosystem that has been around us has to also survive. If not, you don't have an integrated business that will be successful. So, as best as we could, we reached out and started to work as much as we could with all the different parties that make Ayala what it is today, and try to be as empathetic as possible to their own situation and see how we could help them. So it ended up with us taking, I like to think, a leadership position in foregoing rents, adjusting the payment of interests, and a whole range of different areas where we could help lighten the load for them so that we could all take pain together with the hope that we all then rise together afterwards. And then finally, after we tackled that, then as a group, believing in a broader stakeholder responsibility, we then stretched out and say, how can we work to help the community at large, the government, the public sector, and all of us hold hands. And it's an ironic thing, Julian, all of us in academic circles and the business side, we've learned to compete and fend for ourselves. That's been a driving force. Every course you take is how to gain a competitive advantage as a nation, as a country, as people, as an individual, over others. It's a driving force of capitalism. But here we are with a situation where actually unity, cooperation, and working together becomes a core competence in a time of crisis. And so one big learning on my part is that I think academic institutions will have to spend a little bit more time in the future building areas of cooperation as a core strength of the capitalist system rather than just competition, because it's cooperation that has led to significant successes in this pandemic, be it cooperation between the private sector working hand in hand, as has done in ideas that we've worked on in Ayala, and cooperation between the private and public sector to address these pain points. So it's been a fascinating period, but I go back to answer your question. It's all about a philosophy that one has about one's responsibility, and then that drives your engagement. And I'm proud in the way Ayala has adjusted to this crisis and work with others, its employees, it's the ecosystem that surrounds it, and the public at large to help, I guess, rebuild an economy that suffered both economically and socially.
I absolutely agree that there is a need to shift from the Milton Friedman model that profits are all that matters to and shareholders, to the stakeholder capitalism model, wherein you prioritize the need of all the and wants of all stakeholders, and give equal importance to stakeholders. So now, with that said, what does ESG mean and sustainability mean to you, and how does this all fit in your strategy? I know you kind of addressed it already from the previous question, but if you care to share a little bit more on ESG specifically and sustainability for you, what does it mean to you? Thank you.
Yeah, well, if you'll allow me, Julian, let me take it back, because it's an evolution that has taken place in my mind that leads to the ESG and sustainability philosophies of today. I've said this before, and I hope I'm not boring others who've listened to me in the past, but I came out of business school back in the late 80s, in 1987. I was very happy with what I learned, a significant number of new tools that I wasn't aware of, a discipline with which to look at things, a broader perspective, some great friendships. I had lots of fun as well. I also met my wife out in Boston, so that was a big plus to the whole situation. So many pluses. But when I came back to Manila, Julian, it was a bit of an eye-opener. I was still, of course, youngish, still getting experienced, and I realized that many of the tools that I'd learned at business school did not address many of the profound difficulties that we faced as a nation. Massive inequality, a mistrust I believed at the time, of the private sector, a disconnect between the public and the private. And I just didn't have a framework with which to look at it back in the late 80s. So I did what I could, which was I got a little bit involved in the nonprofit area as a way of gaining a pulse, a social pulse on some of the pain points of the country. So I dedicated about 10, 15, sometimes 20% of my personal time to working on the nonprofit side. I was involved with a number of initiatives, youth-related, education-related, and always working with others to try address social pain points. And I didn't believe in staying on too long in any particular project or initiative. Usually I'd stay for about 2 or 3 years and I'd move on to another area, another pain point. And actually I learned a lot during that period. I learned a lot about some of the social challenges that we faced as a nation, some of the economic ones, how other people were tackling problems. And I built friendships that were outside the business sector and learned a lot from them. So that was kind of an independent track to the business one in those early years. We then revitalized our foundation in Ayala. It had a specific purpose. We tried to integrate it more into addressing some of these pain points that it started to become aware of. And then to really cut a long story short, Julian, so I don't bore you all of that began to come together in the last decade as I began to realize that I wanted to get the engine of the economic engine of a private sector group like ours and its for-profit discipline to start addressing many of these pain points, not in a philanthropic way, but as an integrated component of the way we do business. So that led to a transformation in Ayala, an Ayala that was basically leading in products and services at the top end, I guess, of our economic strata, to an Ayala that began to be relevant, I believe, to a lower income community, a broader community, and a much more relevant part of the Philippines. That involved everything from Ayala Land moving from just a 1-product company to a 5-product company. It involved a Globe Telecom that launched prepaid services, not credit related, but people could buy it off the shelf. It started with microfinance becoming a key component of the way BPI began to do business. I mean, the list goes on, our engagement in Manila Water. And so this whole issue of addressing inequality, going to lower price points and providing products and services that were relevant to a different income level and in a way that was still profitable for the company, but that added and engaged a traditionally disenfranchised community in our country and made them part and parcel of the economy, became a driving force with the way we did things. So inequality and addressing that became a first key component, I guess, of that sustainability agenda. And I've been very happy with that, how that has evolved in Ayala. I think the Ayala of today is far more relevant to that broader community than the one that I came into in the 80s. And that's been part and parcel of that thinking. But then moving beyond that, I kept trying to wrestle in my mind, Fernando and I, how do we continue to define this Ayala that needs to be far more relevant to this broader stakeholder community. And we began to wrestle with different ideas, as I mentioned to you, and integrate business practices that served what was then called the bottom of the pyramid and shared value and ways of reaching out and being as relevant to the needs of the broader community rather than just the shareholders. And then we were lucky that the United Nations in all their wisdom came up with the SDG goals. And I remember looking at it and seeing those 17 SDG goals, and I said immediately, here is what we've really been trying to do. Really also paint a picture of an institution that is far more engaged in addressing the pain points of an economy rather than the financial numbers that we have to submit to the SEC, to the regulatory authorities, and to the shareholders. And so with those 17 SDGs began a thinking around creating a sustainability blueprint for Ayala and making that as integrated a component of how we reported our role as a company rather than just focused on the financials. And I was happy about it because I believed over the period of time, a certain amount of mistrust had been built about the role of the private sector. I'm a massive believer in the capitalist system, a great creator of employment, great creator of innovation, great creator of bringing prices down for the consumer. But increasingly, businesses have gotten a bum rap. But with a sustainability blueprint, I was very happy to integrate it into Ayala because people could then see the role of a corporation far beyond its financial impact. It started to report on the way it treated employment, the way it put capital to use, the way we were handling environmental issues, and became a far richer way of highlighting. So bottom line, I guess with that long story, Julian, I've been just delighted with the way the world is moving. I think these are issues that we faced in the emerging markets well before the developed world began to take them seriously, as part and parcel of our integrating our engagement as an institution to the broader fabric of our society. And I'm just delighted that now a sustainability blueprint around the corporation can also highlight to people the kind of role that corporations play in our economy. Because sometimes we are, I think, wrongly bandied about as just institutions that are interested in making a profit. I don't know where that thinking comes from, but maybe it's a product of the 70s and the way people thought back then. Institutions and corporations are part and parcel of a very progressive fabric of an economy, and it must be seen in that light. And these sustainability blueprints really show the very different roles that a corporation plays in society. So I'm a massive believer in it. I'm a massive believer in reporting it and engaging this more holistic view of the corporation in our society.
So agree with those points as well, Jaime. Now before we go into the real meat of the discussion, I think we need to spend time on the challenges to sustainability. But before that, one last philosophical question on sustainability. Are you sacrificing, or do we sacrifice profits for purpose? And if not, what's the evidence? I mean,
well, it's a very important point, Julian, and I think there's both science and art to this. Science because one has to be able to have metrics and measure things, and art because to a certain extent there's got to be a philosophical underpinning and a belief that this will result in a better future. I think maybe looking at it first from the holistic point of view before going down to the micro, all of us have an interest in a society that continues to grow in a progressive way. Any society that implodes because of inequality, because of climate and environmental related issues, any society that has tremendous pain points in health, food, hunger, how is that going to be a society that can feed a significant growth in the economy? All of us will suffer if we don't address those pain points. And there is no corporation that is so significantly important that will not be hit in some big way by an economy that is not progressive and starts to implode. You only have to look at countries like Venezuela, for example, where one of the richest countries in South America for a long period of time did not engage in any way that was progressive. And there is no company, perhaps except for a handful maybe of corrupt ones, that will succeed in an economy like that. So the moment you have a philosophy that we need a country that has to remain progressive, where inequality is addressed, where sustainability issues are addressed, where environmental issues are handled well, and leads to a country that flourishes rather than implodes, you're creating an environment for an economy to do well. And within an economy that does well, then a company can do well. So you have to have first that broader philosophy. The second one is, I think there are ways to tackle issues of doing business at more challenging economic pain points in ways that can also still result in a for-profit model succeeding. I believe that for-profit models are the only way to go. You have to have a return on capital that then gets reinvested. But if addressed properly, with the right technologies, the right mindset, then you can fix many things that are difficult. Microfinance, for example, just to take one example, if microfinance didn't exist, then you would not be touching many disenfranchised individuals who cannot access banking services. They have to go to loan sharks and the like. By integrating a model like that, you begin to start creating a for-profit model using technology and lower price points that engages the economy in a different way and enfranchises people rather than disenfranchises them to join the proper economy. And so in the end, you're asking, can you make a profit and at the same time be involved in these things? There's always a balance. I don't think as an institution, you should use shareholder money too loosely for broader needs, but that we have to be involved in finding innovative ways to address these pain points in society can only be but of help to create an environment that will be conducive to businesses growing in the future. And that's where I think, going back, Julian, to one of your questions, there has to be a general philosophy that all of us in the economic sector believe in. Because by having these broader philosophies that we all unite around, then as a community, we start to create a progressive sense of purpose that leads to a country, hopefully, that progresses. If all of us do not pay attention to these things, if all of us produce products that destroy our environment, if all of us are unconcerned about inequality, if all of us, because we believe we can make a profit in a particular segment and don't address these other pain points, then it'll be short-lived. We will have a country that eventually will implode. So I believe that it's symbiotic. All of us have to take care, of course, that we use the capital wisely. But if the spirit of innovation is there to address these pain points through a for-profit model, and across the board, be it health, education, investments, human capital, you're creating an environment that will grow and will be of benefit to the whole. Now, how you balance that and at the same time remain competitive is the challenge all of us have as leaders. And I like to think that the Ayala today remains competitive from a business point of view, but also integrated in addressing some of these pain points we face.
Amazing. Thank you, Jaime. What is, you mentioned philanthropy earlier. How is that different from your sustainability approach? And how much have we, very briefly, how much have you guys donated in this crisis?
Well, in this crisis, we keep a running tab just more for our internal purposes. But since you're asking, I wasn't going to mention it. But really, if you look at all the help we've given the employees, the government, our external communities, the sum comes up to about 10 billion pesos at this point in time. But that is not something we regret in any way. As I said, we see our purpose as an institution that needs to be part and parcel of addressing the needs of society at this point, and everyone's suffering. I mean, this has been a difficult time for everyone. There are many people without jobs. And so to a certain extent, that 10 billion commitment on our part is just our way of measuring our engagement on that front. But less important, that is less important to a certain extent than a philosophy of engagement on our part to help out in one way or another. But I guess the areas of focus now, from our point of view, going back to the ESG and sustainable development models, is this access and inclusivity is a major component of where we're focusing on the SDGs, productivity and competitiveness, precisely to address that point of view that you have, which is, how do you address these broader needs and at the same time remain profitable? You have to remain productive and competitive while integrating this broader philosophy. And then finally, be responsible in the kind of growth and innovation that you're instituting so it doesn't do more damage than it does good. Those are the three key components of how we're integrating the way we do business. But inclusivity perhaps is the biggest one, because if we don't get to lift the lives of more people than we have in the past and address their needs, the products and services that suit their level of engagement, then we're not helping the country in any significant way.
Thanks for that, Jaime. So now let's get into the weeds in terms of the challenges to achieving or living sustainably or having a sustainable business model. How do you approach improving lives and communities while maintaining that model, the profitable model? For example, and specifically, how do you approach the challenges? Like for Ayala Land, for example, maybe we can get into the largest subsidiaries. Ayala Land, there's a clamor for green spaces, which I agree with. Can't be bad for us if we have more green spaces. How do we manage all of that and alongside improving lives and communities?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, we'll take Ayala Land, for example. I like to think that if you look at examples of development throughout the country, I think Ayala Land would probably be at the top, if not the leader, in providing a mixed use and mixed green space component to the way it does things. We're conscious of it. My brother Fernando, who chairs it, and Bobby D, who's the president, are always focused on it. But they integrate many other areas. And of course, we learn over time. The Ayala Land of the 1960s and 70s didn't do the things that we're doing now. And you learn with time to add different elements. So we realized in the last 2 decades that we didn't put enough walkways, more underpasses, more livability components to the way you could move around. We didn't get all the street widths right. We didn't get all the sidewalk components right. But I like to think the Ayala land of today is integrating all these elements into the way it does things. If you go, say, to Nuvali, most people probably don't see this, but we have massive water aquifers now under the developments to preserve water. We have bike lanes. We have whole livability components that we're integrating into the way we do our developments. Greenery remains a big important component of it. And even something like the Ayala Triangle that you see here today, it's an open area, but it's of course one of the more valuable pieces of property we have. But the finished development of the triangle will have a massive green space component integrated into it. And the final product will be one where, as far as land use is concerned, we'll probably have more open space than any other development of that size in the country. And that is our most valuable piece. Yeah.
Sure. Is there a percentage like to open spaces? Because if we look at BGC, there is remarkably more open spaces than you had in CBD, Makati CBD proper. So I'm wondering if that's something you guys are looking at.
Well, I think Julian, that's where you have to put things in the perspective of the arc of time, right? Makati was developed in the 60s and 70s. If Fernando and I were to go back in time now, and one learns with time, there are many things that we would have done differently. But, you can't erase that. Makati is a product of that period of time, and it's evolved. Fernando has fought together with Bobby D and the team at Ayala very hard to keep certain rules and regulations on densities in place. Not an easy battle, Julian. People fight that constantly to maximize. But we've been a prime believer in that, and we work with the local municipality to try to make sure it stays as much as we can, and that individuals are not allowed to break it. So we all conform to a certain density. Issues of livability, I like to think we have improved them over time. But many of these new ideas we've had a chance to develop in the Fort Bonifacio area, not just ourselves, there are many other developers there, but there's been a chance to set a whole different tone to the way things get done because you have a modern sensibility. You realize you have to put more emphasis on many other things. BCG is BCG, the Fort Bonifacio Global City, is incorporating many more progressive, components than we were able to back in the 60s. Now, that having been said, there are parts of Makati that are being reinvigorated, the way we're redeveloping the whole commercial center, the Greenbelt Park zone, was a fraction in terms of green before, and the Ayala Land Group expanded it by a factor of 3, 4, 5 to what it was. We now have museums and cultural complexes, and it continues. The whole concept of livability and making an urban center a more livable, more friendly, more, part and parcel, of a community that breathes and lives properly is increasingly a part of the way we look at things. But to base some of our designs from the 60s would be unfair because philosophies were very different back then.
Sure. And there's also, aside from the environmental, there's the social and the governance aspect. How are all of these cascaded into the approach for AC energy, obviously renewable energy, Globe, Manila Water, and BPI? Is there something you would like to highlight there?
Sure, if you stay, the conversation could go on for a long time, but if you take, say, Ayala Land's committed to become carbon neutral as a company by a certain year, 5 years from now, 6 years from now. So that means they're balancing many of the development components with reforesting and the like. A case like, what were the other companies that you brought up, Julian? AC Energy, of course. It started with a mixed portfolio of thermal and fossil-based fuels and renewable, and the leadership team there has set a tone that they will go fully renewable by a certain point in time. Across our group, we're trying to start creating standards and goals that are in keeping with the United Nations Development Goals, and in keeping with that. Each company is different. And whether it's inclusivity, whether it's environmentally related, whether it is health related, we're taking whatever steps we can to make ourselves more inclusive, more engaged in being a progressive force in the economy, be it health related, education related, investment related, water related. That is our goal. And so there are points throughout the company where we're moving in that direction, and the metrics help us point to moving in that direction.
Great. So in the interest of time, for everyone's benefit also, we might need to start with the Q&A, open up the Q&A
Sure.
in 5 minutes, if that's fine with you. So I will ask two last questions. The first is on big data. How do you use big data analytics in the pursuit of sustainability? And then my last question branches out into 3 areas, actually. So on the environment, what are your commitments to carbon emissions, to reduce carbon emissions and water intensity usage? And on the social aspect, could you give us an idea of which UN SDGs you prioritize over everything else? And on the governance aspect, I can repeat the questions in a bit. On the governance, the role of the Chief Sustainability Officer, and how does that impact the governance side? And what are the key governance principles? Thank you.
Yeah, well, maybe just starting on big data that you mentioned. Big data, of course, will have an increasing role in all our lives. We're producing data like we've never had before, but not all of us have yet learned to harness it in a way that's productive. But that eventually will come, because we're beginning to get these touch points on the data front much more than ever before. Looking at it at its simplest level, we're trying to at least harness it from our group's perspective to understand the consumer better. Those metrics are more visible. We have mobile phones that are increasingly used as a way of payment. And to a certain extent, you get a sense of where people are spending, what's important to them, the price points. And that's giving us a richer understanding of the customer at this point in time. So I think big data is probably helping most in that understanding of the customer at this point in time more than anything else. Now, eventually, you'll be able to use this data to measure metrics of consumption, of water consumption, of emissions, and the like in a more sophisticated way that will then allow you to then measure it and control it in a significant way. So I think we're just at the beginnings of that stage, but certainly as we look at going carbon neutral across our different businesses and finding a way to counteract the carbon that we do use, metrics are a key component of enabling us, I guess, to come to terms with an equation that will lead to a carbon neutral future. No? And then finally, you asked about the Chief Sustainability Officer. I'll be frank, Julian, that person is massively important. In our case, at Ayala Corp, TG Limcauco, who I think you've interviewed in the past, has done a great job of integrating it into the CFO position and providing leadership there for a couple of reasons. I believe that's important. Number one, to a certain extent, the financial sector are used to measuring things in a company. So all we're doing is expanding, I guess, their role and making them a little bit more accountable for measuring metrics that follow a sustainability blueprint. And although we have sustainability offices in each of our companies, what we're really trying to do is create a leadership model in the company where sustainability is part and parcel of the way people look at business in the Ayala Group, and not something that some external person is telling them to do. And so that's the more important component, rather than just one key officer. Although that key officer is important right now because they set the tone for what is important and gives us all a chance to learn from others and be a champion of sorts for that philosophy.
Thanks, Jaime. One final question from me, and then I think our friend Philip Hagedorn can kick off the Q&A with his question. But one final question for me is, how does this all tie up into next gen and succession? Is that something you've thought about? And how do you best prepare yourselves to become stewards of the next generations?
Well, succession, whether it's family related or professional related, is part and parcel of the fabric of Ayala. I like to think, if you look at the track record in our company, periods of change in our economic and leadership team has probably happened more frequently than it does in other companies, I like to think, because we see it as part and parcel of our responsibility as I guess, individuals safeguarding a grouping of assets for the future. And the same philosophy exists as well on the family side. Invariably, it's not just about being a family member, it's about being a family member who's engaged in wanting to participate and have the skill set to participate and add value on the economic front. We're lucky to have 3 members of the next generation now with us, but they're working down the line and engaged in different parts of the company at this point in time and adding value how they can in different ways and learning from mentors and moving along as professionals, just the same way Fernando and I did, I guess, in my case, close to 40 years ago, if not 40 years ago.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jaime. So let's open up to Q&A now. Phil, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, I'd love it. Thank you, Jaime. I mean, it's been fantastic having you here. I was going to ask you about sustainable cities, and I think you covered that already with your talk on Ayala Land. So I'm going to take a question actually from, we have 43 questions here that have been sent in to us, so a lot of interest on the subject matter.
I think they're fairly engaged, Phil. You think so?
Yeah. If you'll let me just, I had a lunch engagement. I'll just delay him by 15 minutes, Philip. So let me just send him, because I don't have any staff here with me in the house. So let me just send him a note that I'll be 15 minutes late.
Well, thank you for extending with us.
Have to do everything myself here now.
June, okay. I think we have to be.
Yeah, you're on.
So just a few questions. To ask. I think one that I caught my eye on the Q&A. Actually, there are 2 that caught my eye. One is on the subject matter of the Philippines being an emerging market and a growing economy. Can it be a hub for impact investing? What is required for us to attract impact investment into the Philippines? That's one question that I think.
Well, I think yes. The answer is yes, Philip. I'm part of a small group called Endeavor. It's not specifically oriented towards impact investing. It's more of a global institution dedicated to encouraging and bringing up entrepreneurs. But many of the entrepreneurs we see at Endeavor, which is managed by Manny Ayala, who's doing such a great job, is really around that impact investing space. And I think impact investing, Phil, is part and parcel of this new philosophy that a business has a broader purpose and responsibility rather than just a fair return on capital that gets deployed. It has to be capital that gets deployed in a way that addresses pain points. And so why not? Why should the Philippines not be a hub for impact investing? I think it would make a massive difference to the kind of capitalist model that we have here right now. The challenges are many, Phil, as you well know. The social pain points are more numerous than any one of us can count. We should be encouraging of impact investing to come in and address these pain points in any way that they can. I mean, it's just so numerous on so many different fronts, but we should be warm to them, we should encourage them, and we should create an environment that's conducive to their succeeding.
Thank you. Last one is on diversity and inclusion. There's a question about how Ayala implements this at the boardroom and maybe in the rest of the organization.
Which part, Philip?
Diversity and inclusion at the
yes.
boardroom level and at the rest of the organization.
Well, to a certain extent, I like to think if you look at us as a group, diversity in terms of female versus male, our ratios are I think pretty good. In fact, I attend a lot of the new hirings across our group in different ways. And to a certain extent, I think sometimes, and more often than not, we're hiring more women at the starting level than we are men. I think as you move up in the organization, we're less diverse, particularly at the board level. Some companies better than others. At Ayala Corp, we're lucky to have Risa Mantaring. I don't think there's any plan. I like to think we're an institution dedicated to diversity. I think you will feel it across our group. Many of the new leaders across different companies, be it BPI, Globe, Ayala Land, are led by by women. It's part and parcel of who we are. We've never considered men and women to be different in any way with respect to leadership positions. I just think sometimes, the balances get skewed for one reason or another, but not because of any philosophy that we don't have. And I like to think we've attracted people to the board and to leadership in the group that have that similar philosophy, where there is no difference in terms of gender or implication. I've never felt that within the Ayala group.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Jaime. And I think one last question possibly. So I'll take, speaking of, well, there's a question from Salve, I think, which I will paraphrase a bit. How do you shift the culture? Because this sustainability mindset, ESG mindset, entails a culture shift, a way of thinking. How did you very briefly shift that in your organization?
Well, maybe two ways, Julian. You have to create a framework around it, and the framework, as I've described a little bit, really came from a personal philosophy that Fernando and I believed in. A personal philosophy that we had to be far more inclusive, far more engaged in addressing pain points, and we had to be part and parcel of an institution that addressed a broader set of pain points in our society using our for-profit model rather than just the philanthropic model. Once that philosophy is in place and you share it with your leadership team, you also end up promoting people who believe in that philosophy, and you feel it. You feel the way executives behave. You feel the way they behave towards their peers, the environment, the philosophies that they have. And those people naturally get promoted because they're part and parcel of a philosophical underpinning. So you start off with a framework. You sell that framework as best as you can in different ways, and there are many tools to do that, Julian. But it really starts with a personal belief at the top. And then you start to really recognize people in one way or another who are part and parcel of that way of thinking and making sure that they rise in the organization. After that, you don't have to do much. They attract similar kind of people, and those kind of people then move up the organization.
Thank you, Jaime. Maybe we'll just try to do our interpretation of what you've said. I will attempt to do that. Main takeaways is that capitalism is shifting from pure shareholder-oriented into stakeholder. And you believe that institutions that look beyond financial gains and rewards will benefit stakeholders. There is an overall philosophy needed in the economic sector, which we can all believe and rally around to foster an environment where there's inclusive growth and for capitalism to function in its truest form. And you do this by engaging disenfranchised sectors of the community and going beyond philanthropy, but instead weaving ESG into the fabric of a company's identity.
Very good. Reflected. You sound.
I have a team. L, thank you. Helps me out. This is reflected in how AC, or Ayala Corp, has evolved through the years and how it has operated during crisis. Very relevant. First and foremost, ensuring that stakeholders feel financially and physically safe and secure, forgoing revenues, not entirely, but along the way, forgoing some revenues to have a broader, more inclusive path to recovery and even more sustainable growth beyond that. So with that, we would be grateful if you could give us some parting message.
Well, Julian, you've summarized it beautifully. Congratulations to you and your staff. That's fabulous. Maybe one last thing I'll add, Julian, perhaps, and it's more of an appeal to the broader community. I think this is a time for all of us to learn to cooperate rather than be at odds with each other. Our modern capitalist system, our progressive capitalist system, is one that is massively integrated in a way that it wasn't in the past. And because you have an integrated system, we're all tied to each other in ways that we all either succeed together or not. If one component of that system is allowed to fail, then you start to break up the very things that make the modern capitalist system so strong. The supply chains, the integration, the way we work off each other, that each person providing their own component of the system. If we don't help each other, if we don't work together, particularly in the private and public sector, to re-energize and restart that great engine, then we will fail. And so perhaps the last thought, Julian, which maybe wasn't in the summary, was perhaps this is a period of time where cooperation is going to be demanded, should be demanded more from all of us. both in the private sector alone and in the private and public interaction, to see how we can all work together to address the many pain points that we will face as a nation as we get out of this pandemic.
That was awesome. Do you have a team as well to help you with that?
I'm all alone. I have to set my own
In behalf of ATR Asset Management, ATRAM, thank you so much, Jaime. This has been absolutely insightful. Thank you all viewers for tuning in today, and we will try and answer all the questions after the webcast, and I will turn you back to Bea. Thank you.
Thanks, Julian. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Our pleasure. Thank you also.
Again, we'd like to thank Mr. Tarrobago and Mr. Zobel de Ayala for their insights, and the audience for their numerous questions. As June mentioned, we will try to answer all other questions after the webinar. Before we conclude, I would like to remind everyone that a recording of this webinar will be released to all of you, as well as posted on our social media pages. We hope you can spend a couple of minutes to answer the survey at the end of the session to ensure that these updates remain relevant and useful. We appreciate the time you've taken to join us today, and on behalf of ATRAM, I would like to wish for the safety of you and your family. Best of luck, thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.